It's time for business now. Kate Moody's with us in the studio. And Kate, today is World Refugee Day. It's about raising awareness of the plight of millions of people who have been displaced by war and conflict around the world. One of the concerns that people have about lots of refugees and asylum seekers coming to their country is the impact they might have on the economy. And you've got some statistics on that now, haven't you?
Yeah, because it's a question that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has been studying. For the first time ever, its International Migration Outlook takes into account the impact of new arrivals on the labour markets of their host countries. Broadly speaking, the OECD says the impact is small and can be diminished by better coordination and policies across the European Union. Young men with little education in Austria and Germany in particular are seeing more competition for their jobs, but the organization's head says that the overall impact remains marginal.
The labour market impact of the recent refugee inflow will be small and concentrated. For example, in Europe as a whole, the increased inflow of refugees in 2015 and 2016 is projected to enlarge the labour force by no more than 0.3% by December 2020.
That report also notes a drop in asylum applications in Europe, while noting that the US received more requests than any other developed country in 2017. The European Union has set the date to retaliate against American trade tariffs. As of Friday, a number of US goods sold in Europe will be subject to higher import duties. Brussels has been threatening the move for months and confirmed it once Washington decided to impose its own tariffs on European steel and aluminum. This despite intense lobbying from its traditional allies. Selena Sykes has the details.
The EU has finally played its trump card. On Friday, the bloc will impose retaliatory tariffs of 25% on $3.2 billion worth of US exports, just weeks after the US slapped import duties on EU steel and aluminium.
We did not want to be in this position. However, the unilateral and unjustified decision of the US to impose steel and aluminum tariffs on the EU means that we are left with no other choice.
Tariffs of 25% will be imposed on steel as well as other American exports, such as jeans, motorbikes, bourbon, whiskey, orange juice and peanut butter, while a separate 10% levy is being applied to playing cards made in the US. After failed negotiations, Brussels said it was forced to take action.
It's a firm and fair response. The aim is to show on one hand that the EU will not be walked all over without reaction, and on the other hand, we're avoiding pouring oil on the fire.
The EU is not the only one responding to Washington's shock protectionist tariffs. 2 weeks ago, Mexico introduced duties on steel, pork and bourbon. And Canada has announced it will impose tariffs on $12.5 billion worth of US exports from July the 1st. While Beijing last week immediately retaliated after Washington hit $50 billion of Chinese products with 25% tariffs.
Now, despite that announcement, markets seem to be recovering from their initial concerns about the impact of trade tariffs. It was a mixed close in Europe, the CAC 40 falling about 1/3%. The DAX, which relies heavily on exports, managed to resist in Frankfurt there. Wall Street has turned slightly upwards this hour, the Dow Jones hoping to avoid a 7th consecutive session of losses. The Nasdaq is outperforming and has hit a new record high. We're seeing Facebook shares rising sharply as well after the group said its photo service Instagram had reported that it now has 1 billion active monthly users. Walt Disney has sweetened the deal and taken a step towards the prize in its bidding war with Comcast. The media giants have been vying to buy a large part of 21st Century Fox, including its movie studio, international assets like Sky, and its 30% stake in the streaming service Hulu. The Fox News Channel is not part of that negotiation. Now, Disney's original $52 billion all-stock offer had been accepted by Fox management last year, when it was then thrown off by a higher all-cash bid from Comcast. Disney has now upped the ante, and a statement from Fox's executive chairman, Rupert Murdoch, called the new offer superior, saying the combination with Disney would unlock even more value for Fox shareholders. 21st Century Fox shares have jumped more than 7%. Here in France, rail unions are deciding whether or not to extend their strike action over the summer. There have been 3 months of protests against an overhaul of the national company, the SNCF, which has now been approved by the French Parliament. The industrial action is set to continue until next week, and unions are split over whether or not to push ahead. Nicholas Rushworth reports.
There's been strike action since April, but now, after a shake-up of working conditions for state workers passed in Parliament last week, unions disagree about how to continue. That means train services could well be free from strikes in France this summer. One of the 4 unions involved, the CFDT, says it will stop strike action next week.
Radicalism does not pay in our view, whether for a union or in politics, and especially it does not achieve results. I do not want to comment on the position of the other unions. I'll just say that our union has done its job.
It is being joined by another union, the second biggest, UNSA, which has also decided not to strike in July, the start of the summer holidays. Another union, Sud Rail, is saying it wants to continue, and the hardline CGT is urging continuation.
The CGT calls on workers to continue their battle. The executive will finalise the details of how this will be applied in July, August and September.
Unions have been striking 2 out of every 5 days since early April, coming to more than 30 days of stoppages, though action has tapered off. They want to maintain the option of early retirement, protection from dismissal and extra holiday entitlements. The government says lower costs and improved flexibility are needed ahead of the opening of passenger rail traffic to competition EU-wide. Opinion polls show that most voters back the proposed changes.
There you go. So I have to wait and see if that difficulty that we've been experiencing for months really is going to extend into the summer period or not.
Yeah, fingers crossed. All right, Kate, thank you very much indeed. Kate Moody there with the business. She'll be back later in the programme. We're taking a short break. Don't